The Secluded Springs metagame is fully developing, and there's no denying that Suicune Greninja is the most popular deck in our metagame. That being said, an interesting bit of clickbait came across my social media feed this week, claiming that this was the least balanced metagame we have ever had for Pokemon Pocket. So today, in addition to looking at top meta decks and individual interesting things that have spiked some deep results, we're going to go ahead and take a look at a little bit of a historical snapshot to start of how Suicune's dominance in the current metagame compares to heavy hitters of formats past, such as Celebi Executor, Pikachu EX, Mewtwo, and even things like Darkrai Giratina that are still around and kicking. Let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? In my opinion, the best way to measure deck strength from our tournament results, which are the best pieces of data we have to look at for Pokemon Pocket, is to compare their initial play rate in the event compared to their top performing play rate, or how often that deck list appears among the most successful decks in a given tournament. Our numbers on the screen here are the Suicune, Giratina, Greninja play rates, as well as their percentage makeup in the top performing for the three largest tournaments to happen in this last or the second week of our current meta game. And then our performance delta metric here measures how much this archetype grew in between the starting and top performing groups. Any growth at all typically indicates that the deck is strong, which I don't think surprises anyone. Suicune Greninja is definitely a strong deck, and it's definitely the most powerful, hitting 20+% play rates at all of these events and even breaking 30% in the Frog EX event. It's worth noting, however, that in the events where the play rate for this archetype is much higher, like the Frog EX, its performance delta, i.e. how much it's increasing its meta share between the starting and top performing, is actually markedly worse. So, how does this compare to our metagame powerhouses of formats past? Let's start by comparing it to Darktina, a deck list that's still around today. We have some snapshots here from some of the most dominating weeks of Darkrai Giratina's performance, and we see here is pretty much directly in line with what we're seeing with Suicune and Greninja. Now we have an over 30% play rate in one of the metagames where it actually converted up to 48%, so that's actually over the top of any of these current Suicune Greninja numbers that we've seen. And the second stat here, a 15.5-ish percent play rate to over 20% of the top performers, with an approximately 35% increase, is almost exactly in line with what we're seeing. Moving along to some older metagames past that, Dialga Arceus is probably one of the most dominating decks we've had in Pokemon Pocket's brief history over the last year. It was converting from, 11% of the metagame up to over 25% in some of the weeks, increasing by over 100%. Celebi Executor is probably one of the strongest performances we've seen in a mature Pokemon Pocket metagame. None of these metagames have super long tails, but even, 3 or 4 weeks in, the Celebi Eggs deck did not have anybody countering it, and it was regularly getting almost double its meta share between the starting and top performing. And then obviously, if we go all the way back to the beginning of Pokemon Pocket, nearly a year ago at this point, we can look at the Pikachu EX and Mewtwo Gardevoir performances in some of these early tournaments, with, I think, Pikachu EX during the Genetic Apex metagame being the standout in my mind of perhaps one of, if not the most dominating performance. We have a 30% of the starting field converting to over 50% of the top performing. And unironically, looking back at how I was framing my metagame videos then, this Pikachu performance, where it was 30% of the starting and then over half of the top performing, is the only time anecdotally that I was like, hey, maybe there's a problem with this metagame. I think as we draw a comparison between all of these historical numbers and the Suicune numbers, I think it becomes pretty easy to see from an objective data perspective that while Suicune Greninja is definitely one of, if not perhaps the best deck in our current metagame, from a snapshot perspective of looking at where we've come from in the past, it's almost exactly in line where a number of the top decks are typically performing, and it's actually underperforming compared to some of the most dominating things we've seen, such as Darkrai Tina and the Pikachu decks at the very beginning of Pokemon Pocket's life cycle. So, is this the least balanced Pokemon Pocket metagame we've ever had? I don't think so, not even by a little bit. The real story this week, in my opinion, is actually about Dragonite EX in the largest of our tournaments in this last week, which had over 400 competitors. There were not one, not two, not three, but five different Dragonite EX baby Dragonite players that made the top cut of the tournament. They started at barely 2% of the metagame, and they were nearly 6% of our top performing decks. Incredibly strong performance overall. Four of these successful Dragonite players were playing variations close to this within a card or two, with some of the utility things like communication and Lily and Giant Cape swapping out for others of the player's choice. And this is almost exactly the Dragonite deck list that I featured on this channel earlier this week, that I called out as using to climb to Masters in part of my run. So shout out to all the people letting me know that this archetype was not competitive. I think while it's definitely going to have some stage 2 inconsistency and energy, the addition of these baby Pokemon as well as Lyra to help you pivot around, and having the flexibility between baby Dragonite and EX Dragonite, you actually have a lot of staying power, and we're seeing that convert into tournament success. The fifth Dragonite deck list that was not close to this was a more classical Sylveon deck list featuring 2 copies of Pichu. It's still leveraging a baby Dragonite for both consistency and a way to clear out Oricorio as well, though. Looking at the matchup tables for the Dragonite deck, it's easy to see why it had such a successful weekend. It looks to absolutely dominate the 17 trainer Guzzlord deck that's been one of the more popular things in the format, and it's a little bit favored against Suicune Greninja, which, as the metagame data shows, is quite popular. Moving along to talking about some other new decks in the metagame, Latios and Latias are making their first appearance. This deck list went 9-4 in the tournament that it was played in. You have Giratina able to charge up in your back line, while Latios and Latias can put some damage in up front. These give you an organic answer to Oricorio and an alternative way to be blasting your opponent around. In particular, you could be putting your energy for the turn on Latios, letting you build up to this Luster Purge, while also charging Giratina with its Broken Space Bellow. This deck list can also go through the favorable prize mapping of 1 point, 1 point, and then finish on Tina. I also love that it's playing an absolutely cheeky copy of Morty, allowing you to disrupt what's going on your opponent's side of the board while also giving you a little bit of information. An almost mono Umbreon deck list has been making the rounds as well, with this particular list going 7-2 in the tournament that it was played in, but it spiked a handful of other results also. In particular, baby Umbreon's dark binding ability seems reasonably well positioned into the Guzzlord as well as Suicune decks that have been the 2 most popular things running around. And then you've got Umbreon EX here as well, giving you utility to chase things down with its Pokemon ability. Eevee Bag obviously ties the room together here, allowing you to have a little bit of extra sustain, but also bursts of damage. An Eevee Bag alongside of Copy of Red can let our Umbreon EX burst up to 110 in a single turn, which in tandem with a Darkrai Chip Shot can be 130 to clear out most things. We have Solgaleo getting back on the scoreboard with a number of results this week as well, with the innovation being found in most of these deck lists being that they have dropped the package of playing stage 1s that draw them cards for consistency, and instead are playing these legendary beasts with their pulse ability to draw extra cards. The primary downside to playing these dogs that you couldn't attack with is that they have that 2 energy energy retreat cost, but Solgaleo's Rising Road ability lets them completely maneuver around that, letting you jump your attacker up to the active spot and start hitting as soon as it's ready once the legendary pulse has helped you assemble it. We have Donphan EX featuring Memory Light, so it can access Fanfi's Flail ability, putting up a 6-3 result in one of our community tournaments this week as well. Because Rampardos is your secondary attacker here, you're guaranteed to lead on that Fanfi, meaning you're going to be attacking for 50 for 1 energy with that gigantic press very consistently. And should your opponent build up a ton of damage on you, Flail can let you hit for theoretically 150, even more than Rampardos can from your backline. A huge range of Raikou Lightning decks have been placing tons of results as well. If you're looking to play something of a counter to Suicune Greninja, the matchup tables look like most of these are favorable. These exact 20 cards are the ones that I featured on my channel earlier this week that I used to climb through a majority of Ultra 4. Magnezone is not the only partner finding success with the Lightning Beast, though. We have Tapu Koko and Pikachu EX alongside Zeraora as another way to get energy faster with Elemental Switch. And then the third most popular variation is this one featuring Alolan Raichu and again Zeraora as your way to charge up your extra energies. I really like this particular build from the Game Theory 2-2 prize mapping, where you can lead on the Raikou and even put something like an electrical cord onto it, so that way when it goes down, your Alolan Raichu in the back is ready to move up and start hitting hard. Our last blast from the past sneaking into a tournament result for the first time in our metagame is Weavile Darkrai. This build is featuring 2 copies of Dawn, so you can get some absolutely nutty starts when you are going first. Dawn allows you to attach the energy to Darkrai on your bench, triggering that Nightmare Aura. You then push it up to your Weavile EX in the active and crack your opponent's damage Pokemon for an additional 70, letting you do 90 on the turn you attach your first energy. I love the inclusion of Baby Weavile in this deck now that that's an option in the game to give you a clean answer to Oricorio. And then there's obviously a copy of Giratina in here as well, so you can do your best Darkrai Tina impersonation when your Weavile stuff doesn't come together. To close out today with some quick hits on the most popular decks, so folks at home are familiar with what these lists look like. Guzzlord EX featuring Celesteela as a 3rd basic is the 2nd most popular thing in our tournaments from the last week of a major size. This deck list is fairly favorable into Suicune Greninja, which is one of the primary reasons a lot of folks are reaching for it. The utility cards that these deck lists play are incredibly wide, everything from copies of Will to Repel, with the most consistent things to keep a lookout for is that they're almost always on 2 copies of Pokemon Center Lady, Lusamine, and Rocky Helmet to give them sustain, a little bit of extra damage, and then utility to attack twice with 2 Guzzlords. As far as Suicune Greninja goes, this archetype has largely stabilized, with a noteworthy call out being that almost all of them are playing 2 copies of Irida and 1 copy of Cape, so you should absolutely be accounting for your opponent healing their Pokemon for 40 when you are playing this matchup whenever you're able to do so. The claim about this current metagame being the least balanced Pokemon Pocket has ever had definitely seems like a good bit of recency bias when we dig into the actual data from my anecdotal experience as well. While the Suicune Greninja deck is definitely powerful and popular, it does not feel soul-crushingly so. I feel like I can play with a number of different things on the ladder and not feel completely embarrassed, and I did all of my own personal climb back up to Master Ball with a solid win rate this season without playing that powerful and popular deck. We also, as things are developing, see new decks like Dragonite popping up that have good matchups into this best deck, which tells me from an experience perspective in card games like this metagame still has tools to churn if it wanted to. And with all that being said, there's obviously going to be another card pack coming up at the end of the month, even if that wasn't the case. As always, I would love to hear in the comments down below what you've been finding success with, or if there's sweet decks I should give a try to as we continue exploring Pokemon Pokemon Pocket here on my live streams with highlights on the channel every single day of the week. If you enjoyed today's Dex breakdown, make sure you smash the like button. If you happen to be new here, don't forget to subscribe so that way you don't miss any of our future roundups. As always, I appreciate everybody that made it all the way through to the end of today's video, and I hope your next pack is an excellent one.